The first time Karen pointed her manicured finger at my fishing boat and called it an eyesore that lowers the neighborhood's property value, something in me snapped. Quietly, cleanly, like the sound of a fishing line right before you lose the biggest catch of your life. I'd dealt with HOA nonsense before. Fines for leaving my trash bin out 2 hours too long. A warning because my garden hose was visibly coiled in a non-uniform fashion. Ridiculous, sure, but manageable. But when Karen, president of the Willow Creek HOA, self-appointed guardian of suburban purity, destroyer of all things fun, decided that my old aluminum fishing boat was a threat to neighborhood order, that's when the game changed. Because that boat wasn't just metal and paint. It was my father's. And nobody insults my dad's memory and walks away clean. The boat sat peacefully at the end of my dock, bobbing with a soft Tennessee current, its faded green hull reflecting decades of early mornings and quiet traditions. Dad and I had taken it out every summer from the time I could walk. The scratches were memories, the dents were stories, and the peeling paint? That was character, history, nothing Karen's polished, plastic life could ever understand. She marched down the shoreline one crisp morning, clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting like judgment incarnate. Behind her trotted 2 board members, Todd, who always looked like he was apologizing for breathing, and Lisa, who agreed with everything Karen said because disagreeing would cause her skin to spontaneously combust. Karen didn't bother with a greeting. She just planted her kitten heels in the dirt and pointed. At this distance, Jonah, it's not so noticeable, she said, but from a community walking path, that boat is quite distressing. Distressing? I asked, letting the word roll around like bait in my mouth. It throws off the aesthetics of the lakefront, she sniffed. We maintain a standard here. What standard is that exactly? Nothing that has a personality. Todd snorted and immediately choked on it when Karen shot him a look that could peel paint faster than my father's boat ever could. This vessel, she continued, must be removed within 10 days or the board will issue a formal citation. A citation for a boat on a lake, I deadpanned. A citation for a non-compliant visual obstruction, she corrected, lifting her chin. I stared at her, feeling the old ache in my chest, the ache that said Dad wasn't here to defend the boat he'd loved, the ache that also said I damn well would. So let me get this straight, I said, folding my arms. Your big issue with my father's boat is that it's ugly. Karen smiled sweetly, which on her face was a sign that something toxic was about to drip off her tongue. Yes, exactly that. For the next week, I caught unusual movement around my dock, Karen strolling past repeatedly, taking photos, whispering into her phone. At one point, she tried to measure the distance from the path to my property line, muttering something about line-of-sight violations. Every time she saw me watching, she flashed a smile that said she believed she'd already won. But what she didn't know was this. I'm not the kind of man who lets someone stomp on a family memory and walk away. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight her in meetings. I wasn't going to write angry emails in all caps. No, I was going to do what my father taught me. Wait, watch, and when the perfect moment arrives, reel them in. The opportunity came 3 days before the deadline on Karen's ridiculous order. I walked outside that morning to find a crowd gathered at the shared marina. The HOA board was there. Half the neighborhood was there. Even the Smith twins, who never woke before noon, were leaning over the railing with donut in hand. And floating right in the center of the commotion was Karen's boat. Now, to be clear, Karen didn't fish, didn't swim, didn't snorkel, didn't paddleboard, and would rather be dipped in mud than step into lake water. But her husband, Harold, owned a large, sparkling pontoon boat, white, polished, spotless, complete with underwater blue LEDs that made it glow like a floating nightclub. Karen adored showing it off during HOA gatherings. It was a proof that she lived above the rest of us, literally and socially. But that morning, the pontoon was heavily tilted to one side, and sinking. Slowly, gracefully, like it had simply given up on being part of Karen's perfect world. What happened? She shrieked, running toward the dock. Who did this? I wandered over, sipping coffee. Todd wrung his hands. Looks like someone accidentally left the drain plug unscrewed. Accidentally. Karen spat. This was sabotage. She said it loud enough that the ducks took off. But I didn't rise, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. Because sabotage? No. Sabotage would mean involvement, would mean guilt. But I hadn't touched a thing. Not a screw, not a bolt, not a plug. All I had done the night before was watch from my porch as Harold took the pontoon out for a late-night cruise, beer in hand. Came back, tied it sloppily, and stumbled home without checking the plug like he always did. So if the boat had an unfortunate accident, well, that was just nature correcting the imbalance of petty suburban politics. A humbling, poetic accident. One Karen immediately tried to weaponize. She spun on the crowd. This is clearly retaliation for that hideous fishing boat, and I will get to the bottom of it. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, are you accusing someone of sinking your boat because you insulted mine? She jabbed her finger in my direction. I know how men like you handle your grudges. I took another sip of coffee. Do you? Because it's fascinating to hear about myself from someone who once fined a family $300 for festive Halloween lights. The crowd snickered. Karen's face went the color of a sunburned tomato. This is not a joke, Jonah. Well, I said, glancing at the sad, sinking pontoon, it kinda looks like one. That night, Karen filed a formal complaint against me with the HOA accusing me of aggressive noncompliance, likely vandalism, and emotional harassment. I framed the letter and hung it in my workshop, but that wasn't the moment I decided to act. No, that moment came when I received the official board notice the next morning, not only reaffirming the demand to remove my father's fishing boat, but now threatening daily fines for failure to maintain the aesthetic standard of waterfront property. There it was, the real attack, the real insult, the real line Karen crossed. She didn't just want to force my boat off the lake. She wanted to erase it, erase him, erase the memories tied to every dent, scratch, and faded letter of his initials carved on the stern. She wanted control, and that was the day I decided she would lose every ounce of it. Because the HOA may manage the community, but I own the dock, my land, my rules. What would Karen do when she realized that her precious board's access to the lake, their private boat launch, their meeting platform for events, their prized convenience, existed entirely because she'd forgotten one tiny detail when rewriting the HOA bylaws? A detail I kept quiet about for years. A detail that would turn the power dynamic upside down. A detail that would let me do something Karen never saw coming. Ban the entire HOA board from using my dock. But the question was, how far was Karen willing to go when someone finally told her no for the first time in her life? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to finish what she started? Karen always believed she ran Willow Creek. Not legally, just spiritually, socially, dictatorially. And for years, most of the neighborhood let her. It was easier to nod than to fight, easier to comply than to resist. But power built on fear and paperwork has one fatal flaw. It collapses the moment someone decides they are not afraid anymore. And I was very, very done being afraid. The morning after I received the HOA's threat of daily fines, I pulled out the leather folder my father left me in his will. Inside were property documents, so old the edges crumbled if you looked at them too hard. My father had always been meticulous, especially about the lakeside boundaries. I remembered him once saying, "Son, people fight over fences and lawns, but the smartest ones fight over water." I never understood it until I read the fine print he'd circled decades earlier. The dock was fully private property and not subject to HOA easements. No community access. No shared rights. No barred privileges. The HOA had always assumed the marina connected to my dock was partially theirs. The previous owners of my home had allowed the board to use it informally. They got lazy. They assumed. They never checked. Karen, for all her obsessively highlighted bylaws and color-coded binders, had completely missed it, and she would pay dearly for that mistake. I began my revenge politely, because nothing rattles a control freak more than being disarmed with courtesy. I drafted a letter on thick stationery, addressing it to the HOA board. No threats, no accusations, just one clean, devastating sentence. Effective immediately, all HOA access to my dock and its adjoining structures is revoked. I signed it, slid it into an envelope, and hand-delivered it to Karen's mailbox. Then I made popcorn, sat on my porch, and waited. I didn't wait long. Karen exploded down the street 30 minutes later, storming toward my house with all the subtlety of a tornado in heels. She didn't knock. She hammered the door like she was trying to break into a bank vault. I opened it slowly, eating a handful of popcorn. "Morning," I said. "What is this?" She shrieked, waving my letter like it was radioactive. "Looks like paper," I said. "You should be familiar with paperwork." "Don't patronize me. Jonah, you can't ban the HOA board from the dock. That dock is part of the community shoreline." "Correction," I said, smiling. "The shoreline is. The dock isn't." Her face twisted. "This is retaliation because your ugly little tin can boat violated Regulation 7C. "You mean the boat my father built with his own hands? The one you called ugly?" She sputtered. "It is ugly." "And yet," I said, "it's still floating, unlike your pontoon." She went red, then white, then a color I'm pretty sure hasn't been named yet. Before she could unload whatever threat she had prepared, I pointed down the steps. "If you'd like to dispute property boundaries, Karen, please contact my attorney. Until then, trespassing on the dock will be met with police involvement." She actually gasped, like a Victorian widow discovering ankles. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh," I said, stepping back inside, "I would." And I closed the door. By noon, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. People weren't taking Karen's side. They were confused, curious, and then amused. Screenshots of my letter circulated like wildfire. Someone zoomed in and added sparkles around the signature. Someone else created a meme of Karen screaming at the sinking pontoon. By sunset, the entire neighborhood was laughing behind her back. That was the first crack in her armor. The second came when Karen discovered what banning the board from my dock actually meant. The HOA had a big charity kayak event every spring. They used my dock as a primary launch point for the entire neighborhood. The event was 3 days away, and now they didn't have a launch point. Karen called an emergency board meeting that night. I sat on my porch with a beer and watched as cars pulled up to her house like she was hosting a mafia summit. Todd was the last to arrive. I could hear his groan from across the lawn. For an hour, I listened to muffled shouting. Then the front door flew open and the board members stormed out, scattering like disgruntled pigeons. Only Karen remained, pacing in her window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. She made calls nonstop until late that night. Every marina within 20 miles was fully booked. Every alternative launch point required permits they couldn't get in time. Every logistical solution crumbled faster than her self-control. And for the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked small. The next morning, she returned. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just a tight smile so thin it could slice glass. "Jonah," she began, voice brittle, "I've reconsidered some things." "Oh." "The board has voted to rescind the notice about your boat." "Interesting." "And," she said reluctantly, "we apologize for any emotional stress." "Is that right?" She looked like someone trying to swallow a cactus. "So," she said, forcing cheerfulness, "I assume your letter rescinding dock access is no longer necessary." I leaned against the doorframe. "Karen, do you know what my dad used to tell me when someone apologized just to get something they wanted?" She blinked. "Excuse me." He'd say, "A real apology doesn't come with a request attached." Her smile twitched. "So no," I said, "dock ban stays." She stared at me, stunned. People like Karen don't hear no often. Certainly not from someone standing on land she wants control over. "You're being unreasonable," she snapped. "Funny," I said, "that's what everyone says right before they finally face consequences." She shook with fury. "This isn't over." "Oh, I know," I said. "It's just starting." 2 days later, the charity kayak event arrived. I woke early, sipping coffee as chaos unfolded around the lake. Dozens of participants milled around, holding their kayaks awkwardly. The HOA board was scrambling, directing people toward a makeshift launch area 50 yards down the shoreline, a muddy, uneven slope that looked like a recipe for sprained ankles. Someone slipped. 2 people tipped over trying to enter the water. A kid fell face first into the mud and started crying. The whole event was deteriorating fast. Then I heard it, a chorus of whispered frustration, a growing wave of murmurs, then louder, "Why can't we just use Jonah's dock? This is ridiculous. That dock is safe. Why is the HOA blocking it?" Karen messed up again. Karen froze like prey in a spotlight. She tried to explain. She tried to blame me. She tried to twist the story. But the neighborhood wasn't listening anymore. They were done. And when a community realizes its tyrant isn't powerful, just loud, everything changes. By the end of the disastrous event, half the board had resigned. Todd quit on the spot, throwing his HOA badge into the mud like it was a cursed artifact. And Karen? She went home humiliated. But humiliation wasn't revenge. Not yet. The final blow came a week later. The neighborhood held a special meeting to elect a new board. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Word spread quickly. Karen was voted out. Unanimously. Even Lisa didn't vote for her. Her power evaporated overnight. And once the vote was official, someone nominated me. Nope, not interested. I declined. I preferred fishing over politics. But I did make one quick public statement before leaving. I'll restore dock access when the HOA learns to respect everyone's property, not just their favorite people. The crowd applauded. Karen glared daggers. And that's when the new president, an actually reasonable human named Mark, spoke up. "We agree, Jonah. Starting today, the new HOA is abolishing appearance-based fines and restoring sanity." The neighborhood cheered. Karen stormed out, humiliated, defeated, dethroned. And me? I walked home and took my father's boat out on the lake. The water shimmered like forgiveness. The motor hummed like memory. I looked back at the dock, my dock, sturdy, silent, and finally respected. Revenge didn't feel like fire or fury. It felt like peace. Because in the end, Karen wanted control. She wanted power. She wanted obedience. But what she got instead was a lesson my father taught me long ago. Son, the best revenge isn't anger. It's outlasting the people trying to sink you. And just like that, the wake behind my boat glittered in the sun, erasing every trace of a tyranny. Karen tried to take the lake from me, but I was the one who made sure she never stepped foot on it again.